I just had a belief, because I remember coaches in my era not that often would say, I'm not here to be a mate. And I remember I used to sit there go, yeah, but you're not here not to be a mate. Like, the objective of a coach is not to be an enemy. And I sort of remember thinking, why can't we be in this together? Why can't they challenge me? That doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but why shouldn't I explain myself at times? Then you have this model of accountability. Well, shit, our coach is accountable.
Paul Roos is a premiership-winning Australian rules football coach and former star player, renowned for leading the Sydney Swans to their 2005 AFL Premiership. He is one of the most respected figures in Australian football, with a coaching career spanning over a decade. Formerly head coach of the Sydney Swans and Melbourne Football Club, Roos gained prominence for his innovative coaching strategies and leadership philosophy. As founder and director of Performance by Design, he drives leadership and culture development.
What's the principle I fight for most? Honesty and transparency. I think if they're the two, like, I really like, there's a Admiral Stockdale. He was a POW in, I think, the Vietnam War. And they talk about the Stockdale syndrome. He talks about the brutal truth. And what he said was, the optimist didn't survive, because what they said was, we're going to be out next week, And he said, don't be not an optimist, but he talks about being a realist. And what he said was, I knew I was going to get tortured every day. I knew I wasn't going to have any food, and I'd set myself to get through 3 days, 4 days, 5 days.
Roosy, thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Mate, love to have you on. When I think about leadership, I think about Paul Roos, particularly in the AFL world. Obviously a wonderful player with Fitzroy, then Sydney, and then embark on coaching. Have great success at the Swannies. Then head to commentary land in those comfy seats, and all of a sudden Melbourne coming up, put you in a headlock and say, come and fix us. Has it always been something that's been in your blood?
It's funny, people ask me a lot, is it a learned skill or you're born with it? I definitely think you're born with some characteristics, like some, we all have a natural character. We're all in an environment that teaches us, whether that's sport for me or, mateship or camping or whatever. But I still think you can learn leadership. And I learned it through Fitzroy. I was really lucky. Now, at the time, at 16, I had no idea how long you're going to last. You get invited down to 19s. Yeah, you're obviously talented, but there's a whole heap of talented blokes that have gone down there. You sort of play a couple of seconds game, get a senior game in 1982 or whatever it was, get dropped the next week. But I probably didn't realise how lucky I was at the time to have really good leaders, because we didn't have leadership groups. I mean, mate, we trained at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and 6:30 in the morning pre-season. Wolsey didn't have time to get anyone in and vote for your leadership group, and then, sit around and talk about relationships and feelings. And, it was just train as hard as you could, pick the best team every week. If you got injured, you didn't play. And that's the way it was. It was almost like Darwin's theory of evolution. But through that period, mate, I realised I had really good mentors, and I realised that their behaviours dictated what we did as young players. And I think that really shaped my leadership philosophies from a very, very early age. And I was really lucky to go to that football club.
Who was probably a couple of people, or even one person, that really stood out for you with those behaviours, and what were you seeing?
I think for me it was Gary Wilson, because there's this notion sometimes that your most talented player just does it all on talent. And I think we all have that theory, whether it's under 11s at Beverly Hills or wherever you were playing as a kid. You look at the talented player and they're just so talented. You go, well, they don't have to work that hard. So you sort of come into the AFL thinking it's all about talent. But I think for me it was Flea, because he was the most talented and the hardest trainer. And then I sort of thought, wow, that's something that I'd never really thought about. Our most talented player, and Bernie Quinlan, our two most talented players, were our best trainers and good people, mate. Really good people. And I think that was really pivotal in me. That's saying nice guys finish last. I'm like, hang on, that's Bernie Quinlan, Gary Wilson, great people, great talent, and train absolutely the house down. And I think that was really good for me to see, mate, when I first arrived at Fitzroy.
Yeah, but you also touch on nice guys finish last. You can still be bloody competitive, can't you?
100%. Like, we had a really good group of players, but, mate, I could tell you some stories. Like, people, ask me about training. We would have punch-ups at training all the time. Like, and these were good guys. These were guys that got on really well. My first practice mates, mate, I'll tell you this. I'm standing on the sidelines. And back then, lists were 60, 65, under 19s. We'd have 2 intra-club practice games. So I'm standing on the sidelines, red versus blue, mate versus mate, skinny kid about to come on, and all of a sudden one of our blokes get tackled by the red team, wouldn't give him the ball. Just punches him in the mouth. I'm going, another one of his mates runs in, and they're all mates, but they're playing against each other. He punches him as well. And I'm standing there going, holy moly, what happens in the real games if this is what we do to each other? Oh, competitive beasts. But again, that mix, mate, was really important for me to see. Really good people, really hard trainers, really talented, and really competitive.
And when did the penny drop for you? Obviously, you're seeing this. When do you almost get a tap on the shoulder, or someone says, well, you're a leader now. You're like, hang on, no, I'm just a player. When did that come?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you're finding your feet, mate, aren't you, first? Like, my first game I got dropped, so you're still wondering, where do I fit into this organisation? You want to be a hard trainer, and it was pretty tough because the seconds were really good footy. Like, you'd have to kick. I started as a forward. You'd sort of have to kick 5 or 6, 7 goals in the seconds to get a game, So it wasn't like you could sort of just have a couple of okay games. So you're really just trying to ply your craft, trying to get as best as you possibly can. Matty Rendell took over from Gary Wilson as captain. I started to become a pretty good player sort of midway through 83, going to 84. Played for Victoria in 84, I think it was. So then you're starting to, I'm feeling comfortable at this level, and I'm actually a pretty good player. Probably at that stage, mate, people are starting to look to you to go, well, we need you to win this game or help us win this game. And, so probably about 85, 86, where you're starting to see yourself really fitting in to the VFL when it was called back then. And then you do get a tap on the shoulder almost like, we want you to be captain sort of thing. So it's like, oh, geez, that's a great reward for effort. And then you start to think about the responsibilities of the leader and of the captain. So
you mentioned you get that tap. Then your mind shift probably instantly changes. Go, what do I have to do differently? I've got to be different now. I've got to stand differently. We're in the number one. So in my old club, that means you're captain anyway. Yeah. How do you then keep yourself almost grounded in a way, but evolving as a leader?
Yeah, I think you've just got to give of yourself a bit more. Like, number one is your own form, and that's probably the hardest thing in the old system, Treaders, of just having one captain. I know now some teams have multiple, and one of the reasons we did that at Sydney was probably to take the pressure off the captain. But the captain's expected to play well every week, so that's probably the hardest part of being captain is almost feeling like I have to be in the best 2 or 3 players every week, but I've also got to look after my teammates. We had some financial issues at Fitzroy, so I would deal with off-field issues as well, which was, in the long run, it was really good. At the time, I probably didn't realise how difficult it was. So that's the balance, mate. The balance is, how do I give more of myself to my teammates and make sure I turn up on the weekend and play really good footy? And sometimes that's hard. And when you're not playing as well as you would like, you start to feel a lot more guilty as a captain than perhaps when you're not captain.
Do you remember your first really difficult conversation you had to have, either with a coach or with an administrator or with a fellow player, to pull their socks up?
Probably more financially, mate. It was probably more around that for us at the club, where we weren't getting paid on time. And I remember getting phone calls when I met my wife, Tammy. I used to go overseas. The club was really good. I remember getting phone calls from a player in particular, Roosie. I've just bought a house. I've just settled on it. The club can't pay me. I've got bridging finance now. Mate, bridging finance back then was 19%. Like, wow. Interest rates were at 13%. So it's probably more those conversations with admin guys, with CEOs, with football managers, which was probably unusual, where most captains were dealing with just on-field issues, off-field issues. I do remember we had a problem with one of our players, where we got the group of leaders together, but that was probably a bit more rare because we didn't have a lot of time to do that. I think the more prevalent part, mate, was actually dealing with off-field things that I thought most clubs had to deal with. But when I look back, I realised that we were quite unique in that regard. And this is not a criticism of the admins, they just didn't have the money to pay, but I had to deal with a lot of those issues as captain and as a senior player. Most of our guys were pretty good, mate, to be honest, and trained really hard. And I think I was really lucky to be in that environment for most of the time at Fitzroy.
And I was one of those kids growing up, going to footy park, watching Fitzroy come to town and play the Crows. There was no port back then. And you always knew with Fitzroy they'd have a crack. And you talk about that culture of training hard, playing hard. But eventually obviously gets to a stage where, Alistair Lynch takes up the option to go off to Brisbane. There's a number of other players. How difficult was that a decision for you to head to Sydney? And we know you went with Plugger Lockett to the great unknown of a NRL state. But to leave behind the club you love and then soon after, the AFL effectively fold them into Brisbane.
Yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, I always had the objective to be a one-club player. Yeah, but when I made the decision, it wasn't the same footy club, and that was the hardest thing. One of the last conversations I had, I made the decision to go. A well-meaning supporter rang me and said, "Roosy, can you have a rethink?" I said, "Look, I'm happy to have a coffee with you. I won the best and fairest in my last year, got up on stage. I was handed the medal and asked to give it back because I didn't have the proper medal. So I said, okay, no worries." I handed the medal back. I hadn't got my payment. So I said to this guy, I said, "Look, I'll talk to the club again if you can get my best and fairest medal, and I want my December payment brought forward. If you think the club's in good shape, do those two things." He said, "Yep, I'll do it, no problems." He rang me about a week later. And when someone rings you and they've got that long pause on the phone when they start the conversation? Yeah. "Oh, Treaders, how you going?" You know that the conversation's not going to go well. So he said, "Mate, I can't get your best and fairest medal. I can't get your payment." So that made it a little bit easier because I knew the club wasn't the club that it was before. But not easier for the supporters. I remember a lady come and knocked on my door when I was living in North Carlton and said, "Roosy, why are you going?" I tried to explain it to her. Because, as you know, mate, like the heart and soul, particularly at that time, whether it's Port in the Sandful or Fitzroy in the VFL, these are heart and soul people that follow footy clubs. They just love their clubs. They put their own money in buying raffles and all those sort of things and going to auctions and buying jumpers. And so that was really hard, but it just wasn't the club that I remembered, and that made it a fair bit easier. And as you said, Lynchy went the year before, and Lynchy came and saw me. I said, "Mate, you have to go. Like I can't ask you to stay. You have to go. It's an opportunity for you." So we were all good mates, but we were also cognizant of what each of us were going through, and we wanted the best for each of our careers and all those sorts of things. It was funny, in the end, there was probably me, Rossi Lyon and Jimmy Wine. We were about the only three hard. There's probably a few others, but Rossi and I used to go and have a gelati in Lygon Street after the game and go, "Mate, what's going on? We're getting our asses kicked every week," and it was just hard and frustrating. So the club wasn't the same club, mate. So it was a hard decision, but obviously it was a good decision in the end.
And Sydney was clearly not what the Sydney is now, where it's super competitive, playing in grand finals. It was off the back of the helicopter landing in SCG era under Eccleston and a few others, but it seemed as if the building blocks were there. Is that what sold you?
Well, it's an interesting time, mate, because Robert Shaw, who was my coach at Fitzroy, took over the Adelaide job, as you know, and Shawry was really keen for me to come to the Crows. I had some really good mates at the Crows. I toured with Tony McGuinness and Andrew Jarman to Ireland, roomed with Jars. I was really keen to go and play for Adelaide, but at the same time, Ronnie Joseph was talking to him about Sydney, which was really interesting. They were talking to Tony Lockett at the time. Adelaide couldn't get anyone from the Crows to go to Sydney, to go to Fitzroy in a transfer. So I couldn't get to Adelaide. Plugger at the last minute got traded to Sydney, and then Ronnie Joseph rang me and said, "Mate, we're taking the March draft." And people said to me, geez, it must have been hard to go to the bottom team. I said, mate, I was in the second bottom team, so it wasn't too far to drop. But the vision was there, mate. Like Tony Lockett, Mark Bayes, Darren Creswell, Andrew Dunkley, Paul Kelly, they had a nucleus, but they had the support of the AFL, which Fitzroy didn't. And I could see that. Ron Barassi was there, Richard Collis, fantastic. Ronnie Joseph was put in there to sort out the Footy Club. So you could see a vision backed by the AFL. And look, we didn't know we'd play in a grand final in 96, only sort of 2 years after I'd signed. But I thought maybe I'd signed for 3 years, I stayed for 4. But I thought, look, maybe in the third year we might be good enough to play finals. But at least there was a vision.
What type of culture did you walk into?
Yeah, look, good guys. I mean, I've been really fortunate, mate. Like probably a culture of probably the unknown. What does really success look like? That was one thing. But Paul Kelly, my gosh, what a great player. Darren Creswell worked extremely hard. Andrew Dunkley, tough. Mark Bayes, smooth as silk. Ronnie Barassi, like getting coached by Barras for 12 months was amazing. Yeah, but the infrastructure was there. Like the people were there. Richard Collis, great guy. Ronnie Joseph, great guy. So they've put in the building blocks. Tony Lockett, like honestly, to play with Tony and to train with Tony. So whilst I didn't think we'd play in a grand final in 96, and then they started to get some young players, Leo Barry, Brad Seymour, Mickey O'Loughlin, a number of other guys that came to Footy Club, Kevin Dyson, Stewie Maxfield, Craig O'Brien the following year. So they were definitely a building organisation. But again, I think one led by hard work, hard trainers. And, mate, if you train hard, a lot of good things happen. If you work hard at training, put your runners on, go for a run as hard as you can, train as hard as you can, get as fit as you can, and then you start to stack the talent, good things happen.
When did the coaching bug kick in?
Well, it's funny, mate. It's a good question. Like, I retired in 98. I wrote down a list of things I liked about coaches and didn't like, but even at that stage when I was writing down the list, of which I have right next to me, this ratty sort of piece of paper. But I wanted to write it down because I wanted to remember what it was like to be a player, and also coaching had changed. It had changed from part-time to full-time when Rocket was coaching. I wanted to write down the good things about coaches, the bad things, and also the things that I really liked as a player. Then I went overseas in 99 and we lived in California with Tammy's parents. I took advantage of that, went to the Chicago Bulls, Chicago Bears, Denver Broncos, San Francisco 49ers, LA Lakers, and did a lot of research. I then come back and did part-time with Sydney, part-time defensive coach, worked on the Olympics, worked for Channel 7, and then finally jumped into full-time coaching when I got asked to do that. But, mate, it really wasn't till Rodney Eade resigned on the Monday, I think it was, after we played Geelong, or that I actually got asked, would you coach? Because I always thought, well, I've got this period of time, Treaders, where I can like sit back, see what Rocket does, see if I like it, because it's obviously a full-time, very much a full-time role, 24/7, and then eventually I'll make a decision. That decision sort of came a bit quicker than what I thought.
Yeah, and if there's obviously the story's been told by Terry Wallace where he effectively says he had the job, and then the wave of emotion from Sydney fans have seen you in the caretaker role, get great success, and all of a sudden it turns into we want Roosy. What was that like to have the backing?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Like, I was well aware, because when I got offered the job, I said, well, do I get it for more than 10 weeks? And they said no. And I was well aware that you're sort of almost putting your coaching career on the line. Like if you go 1-9, you're probably not going to coach anywhere ever again. So it was a leap of faith, but I had a good relationship with all the players. I thought we were a bit better than what we were playing, and this was no disrespect to Rocket. Like, I think he was just probably there for 12 months too long. So I took the opportunity. And then, as you said, mate, as we got towards the end of the year, like everyone was saying, well, Terry Wallace has got the job. And I'm like, oh, okay, wow. And then it just sort of rolled on. Like the players sort of got behind me, the media got behind me, and then there was the noise. And people asked me what it was like, but I was coaching, so it didn't really affect me too much. And then I think it was Neil Cordy rang me one day, who's a mate of mine, but also a reporter, said, "Oh, Roosie, when are you presenting to the board?" I said, "What do you mean?" Because I think you're better. I said, "Are they expecting me to?" He goes, "I think they are." So I rang Andrew Ireland. He said, "Should I present to the board?" He goes, "Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea." And I sort of half think, and I've got a great relationship with Andrew and Richard, but I sort of half think they thought, well, maybe if he doesn't present to the board, we can just go and say, well, he didn't really want the job. He didn't present to the board. So 4 hours. I still don't know the exact details of what happened with Terry. Yeah, there's rumours. But then 4 hours, and I eventually got offered the job. But when you, as you know, when you're working, mate, you can't get too distracted by the noise. So it was what it was. I did the best I possibly could. The players responded, the fans responded, and I got an opportunity to coach the club full-time in 2003.
I know you got your list there of all the things you think a good coach should have, and you wrote it before you became a coach. So before the human side was smacked out of you, I used to say to my coaches. What was the main point? Was it fun? Was it culture? Was it action-based? What was the main focus that, for people who listen to my Ballsy podcast, it's about standing for something. What did you stand for?
Well, I think what you said, mate, what I wanted to do was hold myself accountable to the leader I wanted to have. Like, would you want to coach yourself? And that's what I say to the corporate people now. Would you want to lead yourself? And they're like, oh, wow, that's an interesting question. But then when you become a coach, it's easy just to do the things that were done to you before. Doesn't mean you like them, but habits are really hard to break. So for me, this was a leadership audit. If this is the things, positive. I'll read some of it. Treat people you want to be treated yourself. Positive reinforcement to players. Coach's attitude will rub off on the players. Never lose sight of the fact that it's a game of footy. Try telling Carlton supporters that right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's emotional business. So reminding yourself, players don't mean to make mistakes. They don't go out to lose. So reminding yourself of some of those things was incredibly important for the success of winning the premiership. There's no question about that, because it held me accountable to the leader I wanted to be. And I had to look at it from time to time. And I had it in my desk for the 8.5 years I coached Sydney. It was the first document I took out when I coached Melbourne Footy Club. And obviously that was hard because we were losing more games than winning. But I implore people to do that now. If you're a leader and you haven't done an audit, go back on your time in your business or in your sport. What did you like about the leaders and what didn't you? And write down some notes. If you're a young person now, journal. At the end of the day, I like the way they handle that meeting. I would do it differently. Because at some point, no one's teaching leadership, mate. No one.
No.
You don't learn it anywhere. So if you can take notes and learn things organically, but by writing them down, when you get a chance to become a leader, you will become a much better leader.
Ready to dive into crypto with confidence? Stormrate Crypto Brokers has you covered. Their expert team shops multiple platforms to secure the best prices for your trades, ensuring you maximize every investment. With personalized support and secure custody, Stormrate makes crypto trading effortless. Sign up today using the link below for a 33% discount on fees and start trading smarter with Stormrate.
What did you learn from yourself in that time? Any great learnings where you go, pull your head in, Roosie? Like any self-reflection moments, and can you share some of those?
Probably that it was a free hit. When I look at it, even though I had my whole career on the line, it was a free hit. And I think because I was able to put that into perspective of going, guys, for whatever reason, the players just had enough of Rocket. And you've seen it, mate. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens with coaches. And I was able to take advantage of that a little bit. And I think the fact that I realised that, I was able to put those 10 weeks into perspective and say, okay, we won 6 games and lost 4. But this is somewhat unrealistic. For us to win a premiership, we've got to be way better than 6 and 4. And we've got to be way better than just, taking the shackles off and letting them play a bit. And because they were ready to have a bit more enjoyment in their footy and they had talent, I think that was the main thing, mate, was that I had a free hit but I knew it was a free hit. So I knew going into 2003 pre-season that now the work starts for me. That was fun. It was cool, sitting in the box, moving chairs from one chair to another. But now the hard work starts to implement a system in order to win a premiership.
And by doing that, I assume the fun and the free hit then turns to serious business, and these are our standards. How did you bring the players along for that ride? Because Sydney's well known from the outside as being a bloods culture. What Roosy is accountable to, Barry Hall, Leo Barry, Brett Kirk, Stewie Maxfield, Andrew Ireland at the time. How did you build that all-encompassing club culture? Because that was probably not seen in footy then.
Yeah, no, 100%, mate. This was a leap of faith. I didn't know whether it would work, to be perfectly frank. You know, the back end of my presentation said, oh, we'll deliver a premiership, I think it said within 3 years. But you put that on there because you think you have to, you know, like, and then you embark on the work. You know, I wanted the players to be involved. Did I know that they would take as much control and take it as seriously as they did? No. Did I know Stewie Maxfield was going to be such a great leader through the system of creating the behaviours and then voting for a leader? No. Was I grateful to that group of players that they embraced it? Yes. I had a really good conversation, Treaders. I was able to catch up with Robert Walls before he passed away, and I was really fortunate. I flew to Australia, flew to Melbourne, had a coffee with him, sat there for 2 hours, and we talked about coaching. And I asked him, and I know he's got a great relationship with the Fitzroy players, and I asked him about another team that he coached. He said, "Oh, Paul, I'm not that close to those players." I was a bit surprised, and I said to him, "Why do you say that, Wolsey?" And he said, "Well, I was pretty hard on them." I said, "Yeah, but Wolsey, you were hard on us." And this was a real big moment for me, mate. And you know what he said? He said, "Yeah, Paul, you were ready to be coached." And I was like, wow, that Fitzroy group was ready to be coached. And I said, and I talked to the players. I shared this story with them at the 20-year reunion on the Friday night at the pub. Bally asked me to speak, and I said, "Guys, I want to thank you because you were ready to be coached." And they were. They were ready to be coached. They were ready to embrace these philosophies that were foreign. What do you mean we pick our leadership group? What do you mean I've got to vote in the captain? What do you mean we have leadership meetings where I question the coach or, hang on, I'm just here to play footy? But it worked. But I didn't really know it was going to. But probably if I was to pick someone that doesn't get the credit that they deserve, it'd be Stewie Maxfield. Yeah, and you've been there, mate. You've seen good captains, and I'm sure you've seen some average captains as well. But Stewie was that first captain, Treaders, wasn't he? That wasn't in the best 10 or 12 players. And he would say that. The captain was typically the best player, second or third best. This was a new model of, no, this captain will be the best behaved player in our Bloods culture code. This is what we stand for, and our captain will represent those beliefs and behaviours more than anyone. And it worked incredibly well because the players were coachable and they were ready to be coached.
That makes massive sense, but for a coach to put themselves out there at the behest of their own players to give feedback in front of the playing group, and I've witnessed it from time to time and it hasn't gone well, and the coach hasn't taken it on well, how confronting and how, I say it, ballsy was that? Because you didn't know what you were walking into, or were you just confident that your backyard was clean and it's fair game here?
Yeah, interesting question. I just had a belief, because I remember coaches in my era not that often would say, "Oh, I'm not here to be a mate." And I remember I used to sit there go, "Yeah, but you're not here not to be a mate. Like the objective of a coach is not to be an enemy." And I sort of remember thinking, why can't we be in this together? Why can't they challenge me? That doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but why shouldn't I explain myself at times? Then you have this model of accountability. Well, shit, our coach is accountable. How can I not be accountable? I mean, you're a player, mate, and I was a player. I never played a bad game. Never. It wasn't my fault. I didn't kick it to me. The coach put me in the wrong position. And it stemmed a little bit from that. How do we take the excuses away from the players? Well, we take the excuses because if they're accountable and the coach is accountable and we can have some honest conversations, then they can never walk away and go, oh, well, that's just what Roosie wants. Now, don't get me wrong. There was times where Roosie got what Roosie, wanted, but it was on the back of a conversation. It wasn't, we're just going to do this. Again, I want to be clear because I don't want to sound like a smart ass. Like, I didn't know it would work, but I was going to hang my coaching career on it. So I was going to say, if this doesn't work, I'll happily say I'm wrong and I'll walk away and I'll go and do something else. And I think that was the difference, that I had a philosophy, I wanted to implement a system, and if it didn't work, I was prepared to just say, I'm wrong, it's not for me, and I'll ride off into the sunset.
Well, you're a man of your word because you did stick fat to it, as we say. Even had a blue with the CEO of the AFL when he didn't like your game style, Andrew Demetrio, and you end up at the end of that year breaking a 72-year premiership drought for the Swans. That must have been an interesting or a confronting situation to be effectively in a public stoush with the CEO of the game.
Yeah, it was weird, mate. It was really weird. I mean, we were playing bad footy at the time. And I think we were in Perth, ironically, playing the Eagles. And then someone said, the CEO has said, they're never going to win a premiership playing the way they're playing. And I thought, to me, it was akin. We were the only team in Sydney at the time. Imagine the CEO of Coca-Cola going, geez, I wouldn't be drinking Coca-Cola in New South Wales. I'd be drinking Pepsi. And I always thought, what a bizarre thing to say. I was probably surprised he didn't get pulled into line by the commission or someone within the commission. Did it have an effect on us? More of a positive than a negative effect. And I always had the view, look, I can't run the AFL and he can't coach the Swans. And I didn't mean that. I just meant that respectfully. So we moved on. We knew that we weren't playing well. It'd be fair to say, I think, for some players, it fueled them a bit. There was a bit of an us versus them sort of mentality. You've been inside a footy club long enough to know those things are real. And I don't know. I've never did a poll of the players that, who was shitty about it and who didn't care. But I think it was sort of real. But the reality is, mate, we were playing poor footy and we needed to play better. And we eventually did during that same season. And the rest, as they say, is history. We started to play the way that we wanted to play. I mean, we played you guys at the end of 2003 and we were amazing in that final. Now we dropped off a fair bit at the start of 2005 from that standard. Like, you guys were an amazing team. We go to, I think you lost 3 games that year in 2003 or whatever it was, and we go there and play really well. Now, we weren't at that level, but we had to get back to that level. But at least we had a body of work that could say to the players, if we do these things well, we can get back to a really high standard.
Yeah, when you mention that standard, you win the flag, obviously vindication, then the challenge then faces, can they do it again? And you play off in a grand final, and in that period between yourself and the West Coast Eagles, there was some ridiculous stat like 10 out of 11 games are decided by under 10 points or something like that. And then you face probably a big challenge as a coach where one of your best players in that time, Barry Hall, has another discipline issue, and you've got to make a tough call. Now, that's a pretty ballsy call when you've effectively got to move him on or make a decision on him for the sake of your culture. Can you take us through how difficult that was?
Yeah, it was probably the toughest period of coaching. Like, Hawley and I had a really good relationship. Probably one of the biggest mistakes I made was, I think, the Sunday after it happened. I think Hawley tried to ring me or came into the office. I didn't ring him back. I went to the press conference without speaking to him, which sort of goes against my 25 points because I was pretty angry, and he was pretty upset. I didn't communicate well. I think I'd said something in the press conference, something like his actions probably determined that he doesn't really want to play with us. So it sort of exploded that week, which it didn't need to. I needed to be better in that moment. But as we got towards the end of the week, we were still playing. Hawley and I chatted a couple of times. And I think because Hawley really believed in the system, he came on the Thursday, said, look, I'm going to give it away. Would we have had to make a decision? Yeah, absolutely. What would that decision have been? Still hand on heart, I don't know, because we hadn't. Again, we're playing games. He's suspended, I think, for 3 weeks at that time. Yeah, so we've still got training, match committee. If I had my time over again, I would have caught up with him Sunday, caught up with him Monday, had a chat to him before I did the press conference. So I've made a big mistake there. But I think the way he handled it was really, really good. Like, he came to me and said, look, Paul, I don't trust myself. I'm going to give it away. And I said, look, I think that's the right thing to do. I think, to his credit, he was huge in creating the culture. Yeah, that 4 or 5 years where he was captain on grand final day, he was in the leadership group, he always did the right thing, and it was towards the end where, as you said, there was a couple of incidents, the Staker incident, which was bad, and there was a couple of follow-ups. And we had to do something. We had to stand for something, and he basically said, I'm going to give it away. And I was so pleased that he went to the Dogs and finished off really well. And we had some amazing chats at the 20th. He's so happy and so grateful with the club. Yeah, because there was an uncomfortable period with the club and he, which, like the champion, the guy that holds up the cup, I mean, it's not great, and I should have been better. But from a club point of view, he made the decision himself because he believed in the Bloods. He believed in what we stood for, and he believed that at that particular moment in time, he couldn't live up to the standards. And I think that's what he said at the press conference.
You step away. I think from my take from the outside says you can see there's an understudy called a guy called John Longmire, and he's done the similar thing as we see to Dean Cox right now. So Sydney have been unbelievably balanced in that period. You step away, do some work with the Youth Academy, get back into the media. Why the hell do you go back to Melbourne?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. So I never thought I'd coach again, and it was a long process. Peter Jackson rang me and said, look, I said, nah, mate, I'm not going to. Then he kept on ringing me during that year. Then Andrew Ireland called me and said, mate, we're going to have to, cut your pay a fair bit, And to me, it was more a polite way of saying, mate, move on. And I say this respectfully because I got such a great relationship with Richard and Andrew and all the crew at Sydney. And I felt like, my time was up at Sydney. Okay, where am I at? My parents are getting older. What am I doing? What do I really want to do? Peter kept on ringing me. I said, look, let me meet with the leadership group. Let me at least do that. But I think Neil Craig was coaching at the time. He took over. I said, make sure you speak to Craigie. I had enormous respect for Neil Craig, enormous. We could never beat the Crows, and he was a really underrated coach, great system coach. Anyway, so, Peter said, Craigie's fine with your meeting. So I met with the leadership group. We had a really good conversation. They took responsibility, but they also pointed out some things that they felt could be better. I probably got 3 or 4 or 5 text messages after that meeting from the players, which was really nice. And then my son said something. My oldest son said, Dad, they deserve better. You got to go and coach them. And I was like, well, that's pretty profound. Like, from I don't know how old Dylan was then, 2021, 22, 2021, he said, you have to go and coach it. I was like, wow, and then I started thinking about, okay, what's that going to look like? I haven't got the energy to do. Peter offered me a 5-year deal. I said, nah. I said, look, if I'm going to do it, I want to try and do something like Sydney with a succession plan. I think I can come in and get the system in place. Yeah, we're not going to win a premiership in my 3 years there, but I think I can set the club up. So it was a different job, mate. It was definitely coaching, but it was more leadership, more being the foreman and running the football department with Josh Marnie. Yeah, and they already had good people. Peter Jackson and Glenn Bartlett did a great job of getting Josh Marnie, Todd Viney, Jason Taylor. Dave Misson was the fitness guy who was my fitness guy at Sydney. And then I brought in all the coaches. Jade Rawlings stayed, great person. I love Jade. So it was just a different role, and I could never have done it had I not coached Sydney. Never. There's no way known I could have done it.
So then you approach Goody. Goody gets effectively the 2IC role, and then eventually wins the flag in, I think, at the end of 21. Was that a proud moment?
It was probably a bit better than I thought. I don't know, because it was sort of during COVID. I was watching a game in my place in South Melbourne, couldn't go to the game. And I remember the game finished, and it was sort of like I just felt this sense of closure. I just felt so proud of what, and I sent text messages to Josh Marnie, to Georgie Stone, to Benny Matthews, to Brett Allison, to Jason, like all the people that had, all the players that I'd coached, to Goody. It was sort of a bit of closure for me. I really wanted the club to win. I knew that it wouldn't happen in my 3 years, but I felt we could at least set them up. Yeah, it was a really proud moment to see them, because I know how hard it is, mate. 72 years at Sydney, and then 50-odd great people. Footy clubs are full of great people. Yeah, I'm not just talking about players and coaches and staff. I'm talking about fans. They're just really soul to the earth people. It was just a really, really cool moment.
More on a general stage, what's the hardest leadership call you had to make? Was it Barry Hall? Were there others over the journey?
I think they're all. Yeah, I think they're all. When you say are they hard, I think if you've got a system, you have to stick to the system. If you haven't got a system, I think they're harder, because then you pick and choose what's important to you and what's not important. And then it's based purely on talent or not talent. So I think whilst they're all difficult, if you have a system and you stick to the system will guide you through those conversations. There's some tough conversations at Melbourne. I had to drop Jack Grimes once, who was captain of the Footy Club, I think. That's a tough conversation. But we had a really heated discussion. He came back to me the next day and said, Roosie, I agree with you. I was lucky to coach great people that wanted to be coached, but the system dictated that we had to do these sort of things to become better. I think, Treaders, when you don't have a system, that's when leadership is really difficult, because you have to pick and choose your battles. And what are they based on? Gut feel. Is that important? Is he a good player? Is he a shit player? Can I go at them? Make an example of them? Do you know what I mean? I was really clear on what the system looked like, and I think that just governed the conversations.
Is the system based on effectively honesty? Does that get you out of a lot of these situations?
I think firstly, who are we and what do we stand for? I think if you don't have that code, then you can't have the honesty. If you have that code, and then Treaders, in any business, but let's stick to footy, then a coach has to explain, here's our behaviours, but here's our technical side of it. If we don't do this, and if you marry the technical side, contested possession, uncontested possession against, whatever that, turnovers forward, whatever those are, that's the coach's job. The coach's job is to marry the technical side with the behavioural side. Once you get that right, that's what the discussions are based on. And then that's where the honesty comes in. Players can see through when you're dishonest. And I think that's what's happening at several clubs right now. They're just dishonest with each other, and they haven't really got a system to make them succeed.
And we often see it, and Sydney was lauded for it, and you touched on it before, the difference, we see it everywhere with difference between boardrooms and on-field, because we're just dealing with different personalities and different thinkings. A lot of business people don't think like sports people. So how important is that, and how do you bridge that culture?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like I always say this, the board are made up of a lot of people, and this is not a criticism, this is just a fact. A lot of board members are doers, in their business. I'll fire someone, I'll change the product. Football, as you know, mate, is about patience. Here's our list. We have the list for 12 months. Here's our coach. We have our coach for 3 years. We have to implement a system. So they get really nervous really, really quickly. So your chairman is really important, to make sure the board are functioning the way they should. Your CEO is really important. My view on a CEO is sometimes a bit different of other people's. Your CEO runs the commercial side of your football department and oversees your football department. The football manager and or coach, I'll talk to Sydney first. Andrew Ireland ran the footy department. I was a novice coach. He ran the football department. And that's the way it should be. When I went to Melbourne, Josh Marnie and I ran the football department. As good as Peter Jackson was, he'd come over every now and then. Okay, so we have to have the right people in the right roles, and they have to trust each other. Once trust is broken, as you would have seen it, mate, all hell breaks loose. Because no one trusts anyone, and then suddenly people are doing things, and they're doing things because they think they're doing them for the right reason. We want to win, but they're undermining. CEO's undermining the football manager, the chairman's undermining, the board's undermining the chairman, and that's when, it's just catastrophe, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Do you ever found that instances where you found your authenticity was being questioned, being tested whilst being in the system?
Oh, you're always tested. Yeah, you're always tested. I think... it's a really emotional business, isn't it? Like, this is where it's hard for young coaches. And I say this, what we're asking, let's use Andrew McWalter for an example. And again, this is not a criticism because you've got to start somewhere. But the problem for young coaches, we put them in the worst situations most of the time. Adam Uze and Andrew McWalter coaching the two bottom teams in the competition. I'll say this hand on heart. I didn't know whether I was going to be successful at Sydney. Andrew McWalter and Adam Uze have no idea whether they're going to be successful. Did I know I'd be successful at Melbourne? Yes. 100%. Now, what did that success look like? Was it going to be, I think in the last season we went 10 and 12. Was it going to be 10 and 12, 11 and 11, 12 and 10? No. But I knew we were going to be successful. I had no idea. So young coaches are tested all the time. But you need an Andrew Ireland sitting next to you as a young coach. You need a John Longmire and a Ross Lyon, Johnny Blakey helping you. Georgie Stone, a wise old Craig Holden, the wise old sage of football. You need those people around you, and I think this is the most undervalued part. We not only give coaches, assistant coaches, their first role at an ordinary club from a win-loss point of view, we actually say to them, no, you got to take these coaches, and you go, what chance have I really got to be successful? So yes, you're tested every single day, mate, every day.
Coaching underperforming players versus underperforming staff. You're now obviously you've done some leadership in sport, clearly. Your background comes from sport, but also in business. You run performance by design, I suppose a leadership culture business. Yep. How does it differ from the workplace?
Oh, mate, I say this respectfully, and I say this in the workshops. I think that's why people love it when we come in, because there's a sharpness with sport, Treaders, isn't there? Like, even the worst teams do a lot of things well. The gap between the corporate world and high-performing team is light years. Light years. Because in business is very outcome-focused. Let's go through. Most people, I went to Donvale High School, and then let's say we go to Monash Uni, Melbourne Uni, Adelaide, whatever it is. Then you go and work. No one's teaching leadership. And you don't have to be a high performer, mate, really. You don't have to be. You can get a degree, then you can get a job, and then you can get up the ladder based on your technical capabilities. So suddenly you've got an executive team that's all really good at what they do. The head of marketing is the best marketer, the head IT, the best IT, etc., etc. But no one's got any leadership skills because they haven't been taught. And this is not a criticism. And then it's the player-coach syndrome. Like when I coach Sydney, I can't play. I can't run down and play. You can in business. You can still play. So the head of marketing can still market. So what I have to do at Sydney is set up a system. You don't have to do that in the corporate world. And then what's the easiest thing to do? Look at the P&L. we haven't made enough sales. Sack someone, get someone else in. So the biggest difference is they don't have the same system, but they embrace it. When you explain it to them, teach it to them, they want to understand it because sport is so big now in leadership groups, and those philosophies are so well thought out, and most people, even if you don't follow sport, most people understand it. But there's not the system in the corporate world that does exist in the high-performing AFL world.
A bit of a deeper one. What's the principle you fight for most, no matter who disagrees?
What's the principle I fight for most? Honesty and transparency. I think if they're the two. Like, I really like. There's a Admiral Stockdale. He was a POW in, I think, the Vietnam War. And they talk about the Stockdale syndrome. He talks about the brutal truth. All right, and what he said the optimist didn't survive because what they said was, we're going to be out next week. We're going to be out next week. And he said, don't be not an optimist, but he talks about being a realist. And what he said was, I knew I was going to get tortured every day. I knew I wasn't going to have any food, and I'd set myself to get through 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And the message there, which I took strongly, is what's the brutal truth of the situation? Players are smart, mate. Everyone knows the cost of living in Australia is ridiculous. Everyone knows that interest rates didn't come down yesterday or whenever they... You know what players are like, mate? Players know when someone doesn't turn up to training. Players know when someone's been on the drink Saturday night when they shouldn't have been. What's the brutal truth of the situation? If we can address the brutal truth, good or bad, then we can get through any situation. That's probably the thing that I'd fight most for.
It's ironic you say that because politically wise, which my eyes have opened up probably the last 5 or 6 more years than they ever have in my whole life. I was happy earning money, kicking a footy, thinking life's fine, paying off a mortgage, having kids, and then your world turns upside down. A lot has changed. We talk about genuine leadership. I look in this country right now, and I know you're spending some time away from Australia, but are back here a lot. We have an opposition who clearly doesn't want to run an opposition. We have a Prime Minister who's clearly not leading. And then we talk about brutal honesty. It seems as if people don't want to hear brutal honesty. What do you see from afar or from a distance from what's happening in Australia? Because like it or not, Donald Trump, and I know you spent some time in America, whether you like it or not, at least he stands for something.
Well, let's go back over time. Like, it's a great question, mate. Like, I grew up when standards were high. Like, if you finished first, you finished first. If you finished second, you finished second, you finished third. If you finished last, you were last. There was no participation medals. You got an award for being great. Yes, as I said, I've already spoken about my leaders that I've had. I grew up on standards. What I see now is we're just lowering standards everywhere. And that's what's frustrating. And then if you talk about the concept of leadership, the things that you've asked me about before, what's a great leader? Admits when he's wrong. Is that a politician? Has great empathy. Is that a politician? Ask great questions. Is that a politician? So even by the very nature of what we deem a great leader, the traits of the people we're leading the country don't emulate. I don't understand. I think Australia is ready for a great leader. I was wrong. I got that wrong. When was the last time you had a politician say that? It's bizarre. I got that wrong. And I lived through Victoria, and I'll say this. I'm not political. I was like you, mate, and we have similar views on certain things, but I was never really political. And I couldn't believe Dan Andrews got back in. I'm like, and I couldn't find anyone that voted for him. But then I used to say I said, mate, I was living, I moved to the States. How did Dan Andrews get back in? Oh, the opposition's no good. So we reward mediocrity instead of going, well, let's get rid of that and get the other team in. If they're no good, get rid of them. But we have this notion now, I don't know why it is, why it exists, that we're prepared to accept mediocrity. And we all have to take responsibility. I'll take responsibility. We all accept mediocrity, and that just flows on. Like if you're getting rewarded, if you're a politician that's getting rewarded for mediocrity, what do? Just
Keep
keep
doing
being
it.
mediocre. Yeah.
How do you
It's the
change
same-
it?
Well, we have to change it. We have to lift the standards. We have to take a punt and say, well, that's just not good enough. All right? You're out, you're in. And if you don't do it, you're out and you're in. And it's so interesting that, I don't know, we just can't seem to have a discussion anymore about anything, because you're either all Labor or all Liberal or all Democrat or all Republican. I had this discussion with my son before. When we're going to, if we break it down to the most basic principles, what's right and what's wrong, okay? Not who do you support and who don't you support, but we can't even have a conversation about that anymore. Like, because it drifts off, oh, you're Labor, you're Liberal. Hang on. All I'm saying is, don't do that. That is wrong. And it's funny, in a footy club, that's all it is, mate. In a really good footy club is, well done, that was really good. Don't do that. We don't do that here.
And the other thing in a footy club too is it's a self-rescue model, because fundamentally Warren Treadray needs to get a kick and Paul Roos, his coach, needs to help him.
Yep.
But if Paul Roos feels like he's helping him and Warren Treadray's not helping himself, he's out.
Yeah.
Where do we get to a stage where we have a self-governing model out in the streets of Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, Hawaii, over in the Middle East, what's happening over there? It just seems as if everyone wants to outsource their power for someone else to fix, because they're happy to sit in shit until someone rescues them. What's the key there?
It's a great point, mate. When I grew up in Donvale, who do you reckon I listened to? Not only my mum and dad, but my mum and dad's friends had kicked my ass when I did something wrong. You know, like the guardrails were everywhere. Teachers, footy coaches, basketball coaches, parents. The guardrails were, mate, what are you doing? Don't do that. Oh, yeah, sorry, Uncle. Sorry, Alan. You know, so I shouldn't have done that. You're right. Now it's, where are the guardrails? And I think that's why we were so lucky. And this is probably the thing that has hit me, mate, after being outside of football. We were so lucky to be in an environment that had the guardrails, that said this is right and this is wrong, because they just don't exist. They don't exist enough in our world anymore. Again, my son asked me this question, it would have been 3 years ago. And I don't know. It's funny. He said to me, Dad, if you had a chance to live in any era, what would it be? And I'm like, geez, that's a pretty deep question. And I didn't have to think long. I said, mate, I was so lucky to grow up. I was born in 1963, so let's say I was a teenager, yes, 65, 66. 75, 76. I was so lucky to be in that environment, because I got my ass kicked when I did something wrong, and they said, well done, that was good, when I did something right. And Wolsey, I said, mate, I thanked him. I said, Wolsey, do you understand the legacy that you've left for all those players? He said, I think I do, Paul. I think I do. But we've just got to, let's all just get better at lifting standards. Well done, and don't do that. That's the definition of culture. The things we reward and the things we challenge.
Well, if you've got any time, mate, I know Sydney took a lot of your time and the Melbourne Footy Club took a lot of your time. If there might be a job in Canberra, mate, you can just simplify, put some standards in there, oust probably all of the bunyips who are just happy getting their pay packet, and start putting Australia first. You might be the new Australia's version of MAGA, Roosie.
Look, it does get frustrating. I think you get old and cranky. I'm 62 now, mate. You do get old and cranky. But I think it is based on who you are and what you stand for and what you've seen, And so I've been lucky. Great people around me for so long. And I do get frustrated now that we're just all accepting mediocrity. And if we all make the change and we all say, enough's enough, a little bit at a time, then I think we can make a change over time. But if we all sit here and say, well, I'll leave it to Treaders, or I'll leave it to Roosie, or I'll leave it to Billy or Mary, then just take control of your own little world. That's okay. And whether it's your kids, make sure you're parenting your kids. Whether it's you're coaching a netball team, a football team, you're leading an organisation, set some guardrails, set some standards. It'll make a difference. It'll absolutely make a difference.
Well, mate, we could chat for hours. Thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely brilliant. We've gone from footy to politics and to people's standards. That's the only way forward, I see. And we appreciate it, mate. And thanks for joining me on The Ballsy Show.
Yeah, great to see you, mate.
Thanks for tuning into The Ballsy Show. We appreciate your support. So please like, subscribe and share these episodes to keep the vibes going. You can kickstart your crypto journey with our partners at Stormrate Crypto Brokers. We've got a link below for you for a 33% discount on fees. You can also buy us a coffee. That link is also below. But stay tuned. The next Ballsy Show episode is about to drop. Thanks for your support.